Thanks a lot. I've been here 1 year at Curtin, and I haven't met many students, so it's great to speak to students. I would like to dedicate this talk to the first-year architecture students. Any first-year architecture students here? One, so it's your talk. Okay, I'm disappointed, only one. No, but it's great to have you here. So don't leave. You can interrupt any time and ask questions, just raise your hand. It's good to have some unpredictability, you know, and some disruption sometimes. Otherwise, it becomes too much a monologue. If it's okay with you, I will speak 50 minutes, or, well, you let me know if it gets boring. You yawn, and then I talk about something else and move on. It's really something that I've been working on for quite a while. I was working in the 90s on the concept of green urbanism, because we needed a name for a new movement to think about cities, to rethink cities and their infrastructure. And there was a new threat called global warming. And we just discovered, you know, climate change, global warming, and that there is maybe a link to urbanization at that time. And so we were quite concerned how to work on a concept of a city that has less damage to the environment. Today, we are enticed by the concept of the regenerative city, a city that actually repairs the damage that has been done maybe over the last 50 years to the environment. So the regenerative city is the next step, really. And it's all about decarbonizing our energy supply and densification and new ideas of infrastructure and adaptive reuse of our existing building stock, and transforming the existing city that's already there. It's less about building new cities. You will be aware that most of the cities actually are here already, causing an issue. And instead of focusing on entire new cities to be built, it's more important to think about how can we minimize the impact of existing cities and by transforming them. So urbanization is very clear. It will not stop, especially in the Asia Pacific, not far from here. There's a hell of urbanization going on. It's in humanity the biggest urbanization event ever in the history of human mankind, ever. And that's, of course, in China, where we have already seen over 300 million rural population moving to cities. So it's really about how can we advise as architects and planners and academics, how can we work with decision makers, politicians, cities, municipalities, city councils, developers that need our help, and how can we sit together with them to help them achieve better outcomes. And that's one of the big questions, because a lot of advisors are still proposing an outdated model of urbanization, influenced by what we saw in the 70s, 60s, 70s in the US, which has usually a car-dependent city as a result. And so we, of course, know much better today. Car dependency is a real issue. What is much more enjoyable is a walkable city that's mixed use, where you meet people by accident, and you have great public space, and you don't constantly have to drive. You are not constantly dependent on the car because it's walkable, cycling is possible, or those new wonderful bicycles that have small electric motors that you can load overnight in your garage. And electric motor assisted bikes, I think, have a huge potential, especially for a city like Perth, where the distances are significant. It's very common for us to, you know, travel 20, 30 kilometers to come to campus, whereas other cities that are more compact, you might travel only 5 kilometers. You know, cities in Europe, for instance, or even Adelaide, as a city where I used to live, is much more compact already than Perth. Perth, you will know, is the most car-dependent, sprawling city in Australia, fast growing. It's also the fastest growing city in Australia. And we are now discussing seriously, okay, Perth 2050, not far, not long away anymore, a couple of decades, 3.5 million people minimum in Perth. So what kind of infrastructure and housing and public space, institutional buildings and transport systems does Perth need if it's got 3.5 million? At the moment it's got around 2. So we're gonna see in not a faraway future, more than doubling, or almost doubling rather, the size of population. So that's what really this talk is about, if it's okay. But as you hear in my accent, I'm from Germany, and I used to work as an architect and urban designer in Berlin for a long time, which is somewhere up here. And this is always reminding me how big the place is called Australia. You know, we're just some fringe dwellers along the edges here, East Coast, West Coast, but there is so much. And I always recommend to new professors that come here, like Francesco, just arrived from Rome, and Elle, recently arrived from Oxford. New guys teaching with us, which is fantastic. I always tell them, go and see the Outback, go and see Australia, because it just changes your whole perception. Once you've been there, and you've been to the big rock, Uluru, I mean, just getting there takes you 2 days. It's just amazing, you know, to see the distances and to see the emptiness of this vast continent, and then you understand, okay, Perth is just, you know, a tiny blip at the edge on the left side. So this is very interesting because the scale comparison of Australia over Europe is just, it tells everything. We also have to connect the dots. I can tell you there's a lot happening in the School of Built Environment. Great things. For instance, we have institutes and centers on campus here at Curtin. Curtin has one of the core themes of where it wants to be world leading, sustainable development. Sustainability is one of the 4 top core themes of the university. And we have 4 themes in the school, which also include sustainability, sustainable cities, sustainable buildings, materials, livelihoods, the whole shebang, if you want so, you know. And we have 2 labs in the school. One is the 3-year-old BIM lab, Building Information Modeling Lab. It's actually a BIM center now, and it's been hugely successful, looking at some very specific ideas how to increase productivity, for instance, at oil rigs or scaffolding systems, and so very specific using building information modeling technology. The other one is a brand new one we just launched this morning with the Vice Chancellor. It's like 4 hours old. It's the Next Generation Cities Lab, Next Gen Cities, which is when you, for instance, go to China, there is the whole discussion about how will the next generation live. This generation now used to live in the countryside and then move to the city. I mean, not everybody, but many. And so their concern is all about how will our children live as urban dwellers in China, and how will well-being be ensured in those ever-growing large cities like Beijing with 25 million people, or nobody quite knows how many. And we have also other places, centers. The Hive is very important, but also CUSP. We have UrbanNet, we've got SBE&C, the Sustainable Engineering Group. So we've got all those groups that are somehow concerned about how we're going to survive in future with an increasing scarcity of certain things like drinking water, or fossil fuels, but of course the impact of fossil fuels, and so on. So it's very interesting to see. And here you see the BIM Lab and the Next Gen Cities Lab and how it's connecting to CUSP, the Curtin University Sustainable Policy Institute, a major, very well-established, globally known institute. And the partnerships that we aspire, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with Paris, with Trondheim in Norway, with Busan in Korea, with the IIT in India, with Hong Kong PolyU, with Chalmers in Gothenburg in Sweden, with Chongqing in China, and so on. So we have a group of carefully selected universities because they're very interesting to us. And we're going to work with them, and we're going to have joint PhD programs with them, where we see our PhD students going maybe there to spend a year there, but also students from over there coming to spend a year here on campus with 2 supervisors at the home university and at your other university. And this is the way globally to research today. You meet colleagues anywhere, in India, in China, in Europe, in the US, of course, and you exchange knowledge and you work together, you collaborate, because collaboration is the key to innovation. If there is no collaboration, there will hardly be any innovation. We know this today. The old idea of the architect somewhere isolated in a room coming up with a wonderful concept of a building or something doesn't happen anymore. It's all about collaborating with a group of experts that bring the expertise to the table and to be bigger than yourself. And so if you can collaborate well, you will do well in this profession. if you have a problem to collaborate because your ego is very big or whatever, I don't know. Architects are famous for big ego, by the way. You might find it hard to collaborate. So it's very important for us today, capabilities of graduates. We are quite specific and we want them to be able to collaborate with others. Okay, and of course, it happens through leadership of individuals. And I just listed a couple that are here on campus. This university has invested significant money in getting fantastic academics on campus here that are world experts in something like construction innovation, Keith, or Green Campus, Andy, driving our Greater Curtin project. He's a landscape architect. He's now director of properties, Curtin, since 2 years. George Curry in sustainable livelihoods, how we ensure food supply in future when we have to feed 9 billion people in 20 years. How do we do that? How can we do that? We already struggled with 7 billion, another 2 billion coming in 20 years. Bon Leon here, hands up. Expert in ecological systems, and so on. So food supply, again, food has become a major issue. You will recall, or maybe not, but I can recall 25 years ago, it was impossible to talk about food supply. Everybody took it for granted. People said, yeah, food, there is plenty. It will always be there. Yeah, Africa's got some problems, but otherwise we all will have enough food. Maybe 20 years ago, food supply and water scarcity and those kind of things, like how do you manage agriculture without pesticides? And how do you return nutrients to the soil? And all those problems have become huge. Genetically modified seeds, of course, become a topic in the 90s and so on. So there's a huge change. Today, food supply and food security is one of the biggest topics at United Nations also. Why is it important? We are not far away from the most amazing urbanization process in human history, I mentioned already. Right in front of our doorstep. Currently 3.5 billion people living here and half of them getting urbanized in 20 years. This is amazing. It's never happened before. And if you go to Jakarta or Bangkok or Manila, those places that, you know, have grown significantly out of control at their edges and their fringes, and they have regular urban flooding these days. Urban flooding is an annual event, or storms. If it's coastal, most of those cities are coastal cities. Erosion, storms, the tsunami dangers, and so on. All this has increased, and it's right here, and we come in with the expertise to help. So I find that young people that get into sustainability and working with these real issues to fix problems in society and in the future that are going to become more and more serious, these are the smartest students we have. The smartest students get into those topics and they want to be involved and they want to make a difference. And that's very, very good for me. I used to run 2 research centers, urban think tanks. One was Sustainable Design and Behavior, a center I established, which was interesting because it looked at behavior of people. How do they behave in using water or transport, travel behavior, and so on. Or food waste, very interesting. How much do we throw out, and so connecting it with cutting-edge engineering, bringing engineers and social scientists together. Again, interdisciplinary collaboration, very, very interesting. The other one was the China-Australia Center for Sustainable Urban Development, and very intensive work with establishing the low-carbon living CRC 4 or 5 years ago, which then has been established at UNSW, and we have to reconnect with those guys there. We had a research program that looked like communities, buildings, infrastructure, cities, and a lot of projects in there for $5 million funding, and postdocs and PhD students, an active hub of PhD students. And now we hope the next-gen Cities Lab will become something of that caliber, where we get funding from government, but also World Bank and other organizations that are funding research in this area, recognizing how important it is. So my presentation is 50 minutes, and you don't have to attend the whole presentation. I sometimes give very long presentations, I was told. It reminds me of you know, some concerts that go very long, and you have to sit there like in opera and you don't enjoy it and you want to get out or something. You can't. So don't feel like that. You can walk in and out anytime, okay? Okay, the future of our cities, there will be some conclusions. We talk about mixed use and compact and why it's important. When I was a young architect in my early 30s, in fact, I just turned, you know, I was very young. yeah, 89, experiencing how the wall fell in Berlin, a city that I always loved because it had this east and west. It was, you know, split into areas that had different urban principles, and there was this wall, and you had two worlds. On one side, of course, communism, and the other side, capitalism, clashing. And suddenly the wall was gone, and allowed us young architects to dream up the new city center of Berlin. You know, how fantastic was that? And then I established my own practice in Berlin, and I was very fortunate very quickly to get involved in some big projects that allowed me to build a lot in my 30s. And at that time, it annoyed me because everywhere you went, you know, they said, oh, you're a young architect, you have never built anything, you know, you don't know anything, you build a house first. And then, you know, I was just so fed up because I said, I want to build and build and build the next 10 years. And then we build a lot, you know, we build a lot. And after 10 years, I said, okay, now I've built. But the problems have not gone away, you're still learning. It's a lifelong learning process. And then I went back into academia, which is great. I never regretted it, because only in academia you can really develop new cutting-edge concepts that then get tested. So if you manage to combine practice and academia and research, teaching and research, and you keep a lifelong link, this is the most amazing place to be. You're not just in practice, producing, getting burned out. You're not just in academia, dreaming pies in the sky. Some people say blue sky, and never gets built. So both is important, but I feel most comfortable where I can connect. And I think this is really interesting. So understanding the city as a place of political manifestation and urbanization as a result of different regimes, you know. Of course, East Berlin was coined by Stalinism and Moscow's intimidating architecture and urban planning very much, and implemented in East Berlin, whereas West Berlin was very different, much more Americanized. And so this was an amazing eye-opener for me, those years. And as you will probably know, Berlin has always been about rethinking the city. It's never been clear. It was always cutting edge. It was always an extreme place. There was never a place like Berlin anywhere in the world. You know, and when you walked around, you bumped into David Bowie or Iggy Pop and those people looking for something. They didn't quite know what they were looking for. They were at a point in their career where they probably ran out of ideas and good songs, and they were looking for something new, and they went to Berlin because it was challenging. Wherever you went, you had the bullet holes of the war, you had, you know, failed urbanism, you had all kinds of things happening there, empty space, terra incognita, nobody knew who belongs to space. It might have been confiscated space, you know, sites in the middle of the city, you know, outcome of Nazi regime where they took away ownership, property from Jewish families, for instance, and then suddenly nothing happened. It was like a jungle in the middle of the city. Nobody took care of those sites, and there were some ruins, and there was, you know, a real jungle in the middle of the city with all kinds of birds and habitat, and so very interesting, challenging place and challenging people. It was a very, very unique time. And I loved very much Wim Wenders' movie, Wings of Desire, Der Himmel über Berlin. And I did not know when I loved this movie so much that I would, in the age of 31, build a building exactly at this spot where the angel and the old man go over the Potsdamer Platz trying to find the Potsdamer Platz. I had no idea I would become an architect commissioned with a building right on that spot. It was kind of frightening because we could reinvent, we believed at that time, we could reinvent the European city model and anything was possible, okay? Young and energetic and so on. So great time. But of course we see it happening all over the world. The role of public space, much more important than the building. Even if it's the opera house, the public space where we meet, where we celebrate, where we protest, where we do all kinds of things, this is the most important element in architecture and urban design. There's nothing that beats it. Maybe only one element that I could dream of, which is the secret garden. That's a idea I have, obsession that, you know, how can we implement secret hidden gardens, mysterious gardens that can almost not be found, but you're lucky, you found it, and then you go in and there is an orchard, and you know, this kind of situation that we know in films also. This is quite interesting. It's not a public space as such, it is a hidden, tucked away, secret garden concept, and maybe the combination of making public spaces like secret gardens could be the solution for the city of the future. So, of course, Melbourne has done many good things, like activating its green spaces along the river also. But then Rob Adams and other very clever people in Melbourne found out that 80% of all public space is the street, the public space. So they focused very much on the streetscape for the last 10 years. High quality curbs, material, high quality stone, good layout of pavements, not that narrow, but that wide, good lighting, tree planting. They brought it all back to Melbourne, to the CBD, where we have now a huge amount of people living again. And when you fix the street, and what makes a good street? You make a great city. The trick is, it's not just this one garden or this one part of the Docklands waterfront or whatever. It is the street. If you fix the street, you hit 80% success. You know, that's where you make the biggest difference. And that changed a lot. In Australia, the perception we look at city was fantastic. But of course, the question is, can cities ever be sustainable? Maybe not. Maybe it's an illusion. It's utopian. We also see that there have been very clear established city typologies for many, many years, for millennia. In fact, the Chinese city is very old, the Greek city. But now, of course, with globalization and so on, those clear distinctions have totally been lost and blurred. You know, the European city, you know, we have European cities that look like American cities. We have American architects building in Asia. We have Asian cities that look like Australian cities, and so on. So we've got the whole thing confused and blurred and not clear anymore. And that puts us in an odd space, because after globalization, post-global area, we are now, we have been globalized. It's already finished almost. You know, I mean, we're still discussing it, but we know we've been globalized already. It's happened since, you know, the last 20 years. So what is it that is the typical distinctive Australian typology of city? Or the European, you know, is Paris still Paris? I mean, Paris did a couple of good things, you will know. Paris made at some point a decision, the politicians, with good advisors, they said, no high-rise in the old part of the city. We have a new quarter outside, it's called La Défense, and this is where we build high-rise towers. And this was a fantastic decision. It was, I remember, you know, when they, in the 70s, when they discussed this, should we do La Défense or shouldn't we have high-rises all over? It's the future. We're all going to live in high-rise. How wonderful, you know? And so there were quite strong opinions to say, let's do away with the old Paris. In fact, Le Corbusier in 1932 in Vers une Architecture suggested the demolition of large parts of historical Paris to build what he said, the ville contemporaine, the ville voisin. So, what is it that is distinctively Asian anymore? When we see cities are competing, Singapore, Sydney, Hong Kong, they all kind of do the same thing, trying to attract young, talented people like you to move there and to work there. You know, it's very interesting, especially when you look at waterfront. What about Perth? Perth is growing, fastest growing, second fastest, only Darwin is growing faster. But Darwin is, of course, much smaller. Perth is significantly growing, and we don't want Perth to really sprawl further. That's why we initiated a project called Compact Cities, and compacting, growing inside rather than towards the outside. Say, enough is enough, there's a growth boundary, Perth does not grow any further. That's what we advocate as a group, and we say, we talk to the Lord Mayor and to people at the Department of Planning and say, we're going to have to stick to a very rigid growth boundary, otherwise, you know, you keep growing forever. You lose precious agricultural land, you sprawl, and sprawl is always very, very inefficient. It makes us more car dependent, and so on, many reasons. So Australian cities, are they growing compact? Maybe not yet. We're just about to turn around, to turn the corner. We see Sydney inner city, 20 years ago, it had very few residents. It had 100,000. Now it's got 200,000 residents in the bigger inner city area of Sydney. Same happened in Melbourne, and I believe the same is happening now in Perth. More and more people want to live close to cinema and pub and workplace, and they want to do away with driving. In fact, young people, I speak to a lot of young people, they say, I don't have a car and I don't want the burden of having to fill it and to pay rego and to drive and find the car park. It's enough hassle to find the car park on Curtin campus. Why do I need it? You know? So the idea is to join a club and be a membership rather than ownership of a car. they are a member of a car-sharing club, or maybe they're a member of 3 clubs. So wherever you walk, there's always close by somewhere a car that you can unlock with a code and you can drive off when you need a car. But many people don't need a car all the time. So it's interesting. But just showing you some of my projects, I don't think it's very good to show projects where I am for myself and what you are interested in, because I could, of course, talk about the different projects and so, but I don't think that's really necessarily. We should more talk about the concept and the idea. The big ideas is what I'm interested in. What happened, those buildings that I was fortunate to build, for instance, this is where the movie, The Wings of Desire, you saw earlier. We were very, very clear as young architects in our studio that it was about energy consumption and making sure those buildings are running very efficient, less than 50 kilowatt hours per square meter, not wasting any drinking water for toilet flushing or irrigation of gardens, but collecting rainwater and have gray water cycles. Those things were very interesting for us. Activating the concrete slab, using something called cooling ceiling, passive cooling, and activating an underfloor air supply, those kind of very sustainable workplaces. It's a big movement where you maximize daylight, that you're not dependent on artificial lighting for most of the day. No workplace is more than 4 meters away from an openable window, and you can open the window. It's very important. You have something called mixed mode. If it's too cold or too hot, systems can kick in, but they don't have to run the whole time. Diane Smith and I once worked at a university in Brisbane and at QUT, and they had a brand new building on their campus where our offices were. And not only most of the time we couldn't open the window, but the air condition was running 365 days a year, non-stop, remember? And the light in the toilet, you couldn't turn it off. There was no switch. They just didn't bother to install a switch. This is 12 years ago. Today you wouldn't do it anymore. But Queensland, 12, 13 years ago, has been building buildings, and so did Western Australia, without light switches, because they said, well, energy is so cheap. We just keep the light on day and night. So everybody who walks in the toilet, there's always light. How great is that? And then there was an automatic, do you remember that? You probably have never been to the male toilet, but I tell you, I can tell you, in the male toilet, the urinal would flush every 15 minutes, automatically, all year long. Drinking water, flushing, sorry. So you would have a huge amount of drinking water and energy wasted non-stop. You couldn't even turn it off. And everybody saw this is a great modern new office building. The university built it at that time. And we were always wondering, how can we stop this? How can we turn off the aircon? You know, it was like freezing cold and they're still cooling and so on. So, because even in a hot climate like in Brisbane, you don't need the aircon the whole year. It's okay to open the window half the year, you know, and year two, I think, you know. So, anyway, but let's look at life cycle costs. Very, very important. Running buildings is so expensive. And I just came up with a couple of figures, and they are, of course, a little bit exaggerated, I know. But let me make the point clear. The capital cost for constructing an office building, and we're building many now on Greater Curtin, let's say it's 1 million. It's pretty big, pretty expensive building. The operation of that building over 30 or 40 years, which we expect as a minimum, is bigger. It's probably 3 times as much, because the energy, the cooling, the heating, the maintenance, the repair, the water, all those things cost much more over 40 years than original construction. So if you find the way to build it in a way that you don't have high energy and water costs, you already save a lot of money there. And it's an interesting discussion to have with people that commission buildings. But the biggest saving potential, you saw it already, 10 times bigger, much bigger, is the cost for salaries, human resource. This is so expensive. So if you make a building that inspires people, and it makes them more productive, and it doesn't make them sick, and they have no sick leave because they love to come to the building, and they're productive every day, and they love it, this is where the biggest gain is, because people are very expensive. We spend the biggest amount always on salaries. And so if you manage to build architecture or spaces, interior or cities that actually ensure health and well-being, this is where the biggest bang for the buck is. And we're just discovering this now, okay? This is very, very interesting. That's why behavior change is so interesting. It's got so huge potential because it costs nothing. If you change somebody's behavior to do the right thing, by psychology, by talking, by awareness rising, by education, and so on, it has cost you nothing, and you have the biggest impact. And so that's a very important, it's maybe the most important point I make today. So I move on now. And just a couple of other things. You all probably know the McKinsey abatement curve. Very, very important document. It was launched 2003 by McKinsey and Partners, a big consulting company, in 2009 revised. This was the first time we had the evidence that actually everything you do here would save money when you build a new building, like LED lighting. Because it uses less energy, it produces less heat that you have to cool down, it doesn't break for 10 years, and so on. Less maintenance. So how fantastic is that? Retrofitting residential air condition, green roofs, all those things that we can do and we take now for granted, insulating buildings. All this, when you invest here, the bankers, McKinsey, accountants, tell us, you're right, you save money. Some other things, of course, are still very expensive. This takes a long time for payback. But these are technologies that are available, and this was interesting because the first time in 2003, we were given evidence by the accountants that told us, yes, you're on the right way. These are the most cost-effective energy conservation technologies, and you will have savings and payback in a very short time, like sometimes 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. And that's very, very good because that helped us tremendously in the battle to convince people to spend a little bit more upfront on green buildings, maybe 10% more, telling them, look, don't worry, in 7 years you start earning money because you have less maintenance costs. The other things we were very interested always is, what are the strategies that are most applicable to different climates? And in Australia, we have different climates. We've got, tropical, subtropical, temperate, and so on. So it's very interesting to understand that not every strategy works well in every climate. Like night ventilation is good in some areas, and solar heating is maybe not very useful in the tropics, and so on. So there's a lot of research that you're going to have to do to understand the potential of passive design, which is already there, like orientation, making buildings compact, how do you stack functions, all the things that don't cost you anything. And you know this famous saying that the first moments when you come up with a conceptual design, you make the biggest decision, which are the biggest potential cost savers. Later, when building is under construction, you have much less opportunity to influence that. So there is this famous curve where you can influence the building and where you have the potential to have the biggest impact. And so you're going to have to make sure as architect, you know all about the best orientation, how to build with the sun, catching the breeze if you need cross ventilation to cool, and so on, shading. The United Nations actually is playing a quite interesting role, and I want you to visit the website. And the Future We Want Rio +20 report, a report I contributed to in 2012, a big urbanization document of the future, where now we see sustainable development goals will come up in September this year for the next 10 years, which are the SDGs for cities, a new 10-year framework that will do a range of things, empower communities, but also look at best practice and so on. Because urbanization is not going to go away. Urban slums will always be a problem, in fact, an increasing problem. And now, of course, we are more than 50% urban on the globe, as you will know. That's why business as usual is not good enough. Business as usual, let's say like we've done it in the 80s and 90s, now we have to do what's called sustainable urban development, which turns sprawl into more compact situation and integrated, mixed use, and interconnected, of course. And this is easy said, but what kind of concepts are underlying here that would help us to do that is really the question. And I would like to animate you to do research in those areas when you do your thesis in your course. I think that's a wonderful topic. And you will hear always the 21st century is the golden age of cities. People keep telling us now that we all live in cities more and more. It is the age of the city, but it's not yet the age of the sustainable city. And that's causing a problem because sustainable city concepts, we know how to do it, but it still doesn't happen enough. There are still barriers, political barriers, financial barriers, old habits, and so on. And of course we have to do it. It's about cities. 60% of greenhouse gas emissions are generated by buildings. You are aware of that. And we can operate in many, many areas. You know, we spoke about energy and water already, but also waste, transport, mobility, public space, and so on. One issue that holds us back, I realize, is there is no agreement on what is the sustainable city or the renewable city or green urbanism or the low carbon city or the regenerative city or the lifelong learning city or the compact city or the smart city. These are all different terms. People use different terms. And it's very difficult to find an agreement what is meant with those different terms and how do they interrelate. All of them mean, of course, one thing, which is the equitable, prosperous, sustainable city. That's what they mean, but they use different terms. And we haven't really come to a point of agreement yet. We still use all kinds of different terms. I use a lot the low-carbon city term, but it's not maybe really helpful because we have to think about, do others really understand what we mean? Do they always get it? And do they maybe think about something totally different? If we talk about low-carbon cities, you know, are we on the same page? We are not on the same page yet. So there is more research and convincing clearly necessary to transform cities to energy-efficient cities, from sprawl to mixed use to zero carbon. But what happens at the moment, and you will be aware of those debates, is the opposite is happening. CO2 emissions keep rising, electricity consumption keeps rising, and we again produce a lot of energy by burning brown coal at the moment. There's quite an interesting debate going on about the renewable energy target. Just at the moment, in federal government, you know, the current government has done away with the renewable energy target and now wants to reintroduce it at a lower level. But there is what's called the road to Paris. In Paris, at the end of the year, there's going to be a major UN meeting where we see China and US in agreement about how to curb greenhouse gas emissions. And Canada and Australia are running danger to be left out and being branded as the bad guys because Canada and Australia is not getting their act together in the global arena in an agreement on greenhouse gas emissions. So that's quite concerning because we talk one thing and the reality is quite different. And it's happening in other cities where we see Stockholm has now achieved 50% of all its energy is from renewable energy sources. That's pretty significant. All year long, not just when the wind blows or when the sun shines. It's all year long. So that's a conservative average. Copenhagen and Oslo are getting there too. They have 2.5 tons per CO2 per capita. This is the emission of those cities per inhabitant. This is pretty significant. This is world leading. This is world leading. Whereas in Australia, we are more around 14.5, where the Americans are too. And the Chinese cities, of course, have caught up with Europe. Chinese cities had a smaller greenhouse gas footprint, but now it's actually the same like Europe. The carrying capacity is clearly under threat. You know, ecological overshoot is a major issue. There's a theory by Wackernagel, Matthias Wackernagel, who has done a lot of accounting, ecological overshoot, and what does it mean? How much can we consume as one person on the planet, and when are we in ecological overshoot? Asian cities quickly catching up. So you see the figures here, especially where we see an increase of consumption of a new middle class in Asia Pacific, where we have now 500 million people belonging to the middle class, and in 2030 over 3 billion people belonging to the middle class, sending hopefully their kids to Australia for education. So these are the interesting topics that you are aware, but we have to research more, we have to discuss more. Today is really only, you know, tip of the iceberg, to be honest. But those topics like overconsumption, recycling, and sustainable lifestyles, all very, very important. The other big driver of all that is, of course, demographic change, population growth, we mentioned, but also the aging population. More and more people aging, getting older, over 60 and older. It's the fastest growing part of the population. So when we have many, many more old people, what do? We have to have a different city. No steps, obviously, and people are living easily to 100 years. So how do we need to lay out the city for public transport that 80, 90, 95-year-old people can participate in public transport and stay mobile because they can't drive anymore most of the time? And how do we do this? What kind of green space do we need? What kind of meeting places? And so on. What kind of housing? So we've done a lot of research. Don't want to go through the whole thing. A lot of research, and many of you will have seen that before. The evolution of city theory from, Greek and Rome, ancient cities, 19th century, walled cities, Wagner, Otto Wagner in Vienna, Haussmann in Paris, Cerda in Barcelona, then Chicago, then Olmsted, Camilo Sitte, then of course Garden City theory by Ebenezer Howard, early ideas of suburbia emerging, then Raymond Unwin's plan, then Hampstead Heath, Letchworth Garden, then Berlin, Bruno Tau, then Dunkman's plan for Chicago, Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burham, the invention of the high-rise tower, Karl Marx, early modernism, Taut, Gropius, Hilbersheimer, May, Bauhaus School, functional city theory. You're all aware of that. You've learned that all in history and theory. I'm sure you did. And it's very interesting to think about how cities evolved and functional zoning and the invention of the suburb, the shopping mall, the freeway, and of course the impact of the car on city development as expressed in Chandigarh, a new city in India, in North India, Punjab, or in Brasilia, a new city built as a new capital, and so also, of course, Canberra, a new city built from scratch. The Siam, Bauhaus, Louis Mumford, Greater London, Broadacre, Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre, new towns, Runcorn, Woods Candila, Bakema, these are all, Aldo van Eyck, Smithsons, these are all theories on cities. Okay, Kevin Lynch, Gordon Cullen, Jane Jacobs. What's the famous book of Jane Jacobs?
I have absolutely no idea. Good book too.
The death and life of American cities. And don't ask me why she says first death and then life. It's like getting reborn. You know, I always thought it should be life and death, but you're right. It's the death and life of American cities, written in 1963. What's the famous book from Kevin Lynch?
City Image.
Yeah, very good. This is good. Guy knows, you know, it's very good. So, townscape, the invention of the townscape, and then the rediscovery of the compact mixed-use city with people, theorists like Creer, Leon and Rob Creer, Aldo Rossi, Christopher Alexander, Collage City by Colin Rowe. Yes, you knew it. Yes. Colin Rowe and Fred Cutter, a very important book. If you haven't read Collage City, you're going to have to read Collage City, written in 1978. Then, of course, many, many other important. That's why we handed out a reading list. Did you all get the reading list? Okay. So then critical regionalism, quite important at that point, and so on. And I can't go through all the whole thing, but what happens is, the point I make is, in the 20s, new city typologies emerged because of the car, the impact of the automobile, and the way we drove around, and suddenly we moved out into the green in a suburb. This had an impact of an entire new series of cities that we didn't know before. Now we are at the point where, again, new city typologies emerge because of theory of green urbanism and low-carbon cities, where we have urban walkable villages. Vancouver is trying to do it, Curitiba, Copenhagen, Shanghai waterfront after Beijing Olympics, a lot of things happening. So the question is, what's going to be the next step? How do those cities look like? We don't quite know yet. Who is going to emerge as the city makers of those cities? Do we have them in the room here? Possibly. You know, it's your generation going to have to put the flesh on the bone here and show us what those cities look like. Okay? But the point I make is, here was a total break with history. And as a result, new city typologies emerged. And now we are at the point where we have a total break of history, doing away with the fossil fuel-based city that was based on cheap oil and gas and coal. And now we don't quite know yet what those new cities will look like. You're going to have to show us. And those new cities will come. And there will be different typologies, different ways to do it. But you're going to be looked at. What will be next? We will look at you to define those cities that are called eco-city or green urbanism. Again, many different terms for that. So really interesting. And it's been going on for a while. You've seen Buckminster Fuller's proposal for New York to protect itself from itself. 1950s, a big dome. Never built, of course, but very interesting. It's all about how can we make sure a certain part where people live enjoy better air quality and so on. Dongtan, never built. Dubai, unfortunately, has been built. Al, you lived in Dubai. Have you been part of that? Admit it. Admit it now. Which part did you do? Anyway, they had it all in their hands. Just kidding. So you know the issue. Abu Dhabi, Dubai, oil-rich countries want to put themselves on the map, want to show the world the future and what they can do, and branding, city branding. Never liked city branding. So they had it all, but is it really the model of the future? I say no, and I'll tell you why. This is, of course, an interesting experiment by Foster. 1 square kilometer outside Abu Dhabi, next to the airport in the desert, an entire sustainable city was on the paper. But what is being built is quite different. That's what it looks like at the moment. The first 10 buildings have been built. They found that nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to live there. The idea was 60,000 people would move there, and 50,000 people would work there. But now it becomes more like a business park, and they started a university there, and it was fantastic. It all made sense on the paper. But the realization, for instance, everything was supposed to be on a podium, and you had electric vehicles in the basement driving around, and you had a sub-labyrinth for cooling, and cool air would stream up. But at some point they found to put the whole city up on a 5-meter podium was just too expensive. And it would also remove people, walkability. You would be up on a podium. It makes all kind of questions about that. So they started to drop the podium and put buildings down in the sand, and this made a huge difference, and it's not getting built the way it was. But there is this vision that doesn't get built. These are eco-cities for China. There are different ones. I wrote different articles about those, and this is by a German company. Anyway, this is Arab, this is American. It's all in China. Some are under construction. And the problem is really the watering down. We saw it with Tianjin Eco City too. Great attempt, great start, and then it takes too long. Political change. Ministers step down. In the case of Dongtan, guy was arrested, he's in prison because found out it was corruption, So all kind of things happen on the life cycle of making a city. It takes 20 years. You can't build cities overnight. So when you have political short-sighted cycles of 3-4 years, election cycles, one guy is elected, let's say a powerful mayor. He loses power. The first guy who comes in, what does he do? He stops the project, because he doesn't want to be involved with that project. So we have very little chance to carry a planning theory, a theoretical model to implementation, to completion over 20 years because of those difficult situations, or they run out of money, like in other cases. So it's difficult. And the reality, the harsh realities look quite different. This is a unit in Hong Kong where 6 people share something like 12 square meters, Or this is in Mongolia, biggest city in Mongolia. They're meant to be 1.3 million people moving there, and then they found only 10,000 people came. So it wasn't worth finishing the public space. There's a guy walking. I mean, it's pretty shocking, Then this is, of course, the new slum, the new underclass in Shenzhen, where we have incredible densities. The gaps between the buildings, you can shake your hand with your neighbor, This is a meter wide or something, So you get, these are 10, 12-story buildings. You get no daylight down there. This is in Shenzhen. It has all been built recently for immigrants that came, Chinese that moved from the countryside to Shenzhen to do some kind of labor work. I would almost call it slavery. No rights. They can't get the identity card they need to send their kids to school, or if you do need to go in hospital, you can't be treated because you haven't got that card. So it's a big issue where you have a new underclass in China that came along with those new cities that are, of course, much less glamorous than on the posters. And, of course, other challenges like air pollution, water pollution, food poisoning, all kinds of things, traffic congestion. So we found a lot of uncontrolled, out of control urbanization is leading to all kinds of very problematic, complex challenges because people just look at one element and not connecting the dots, like we said at the beginning. And, of course, old, outdated models of urbanization. And once you've got a city that's got a problem with water supply or transport, congestion, very difficult to fix that. You know? So to unwind and undo that problem, good luck. It is very difficult, of course. So we found a lot of green urbanism principles are actually traditional urbanism models, like we find in cities like Barcelona or Paris, where we have 6, 7-story compact mixed-use buildings that share partition walls, that share circulation. Very interesting ideas of urbanization. We don't have to reinvent the city. It's already all there. The compact, mixed-use, walkable city is, again, the best model, the best model. And that's the basis of green urbanism. I don't want to get into that. You can read about the 15 principles of green urbanism and the 3 pillars. And projects I was involved. I was leading a competition project, for instance. This one was the first one we did a couple of years ago, where Taree is a city north of Sydney. They asked me to be a judge for a competition for their waterfront development. And I said, don't ask me to be a judge. Ask me to submit a proposal. Much better. I want to participate, not looking at other people's work. I said, OK. Then I set up a team with a landscape architect from Sydney and Arup, the engineers, and a couple of other people. And we were visiting the site on the Manning River. We integrated old factory buildings, 400 units. These are townhouses. And the idea was to have the right density, the right mixed use, the right concept in terms of retail and all that along the waterfront, make it all public, and have a lot of biking and cycling and walking along, and give everybody who moves there a free bike. And they love that concept. Now listen, that's interesting. Everybody who moves there, let's say a family of 4, a couple and 2 kids, they spend all their money on their unit. When they move in, they get 4 new bikes to make sure a lot of people are biking along that waterfront. Because usually young families, they spend every dollar on the unit. They haven't got money for new bikes. But if you give them free new bikes, you can guarantee they're all on their bikes up and down the river. So it's fantastic. It works very well. And this doesn't cost really much. And it was a very interesting, holistic concept we came up. And we won the first prize on that, awarded. And we were commissioned to do a development plan for master planning, and then it got into different plots and so. And I think some of those people are still working on that project. And then 6 months later, we were invited by Mildura. It's a very similar situation. Again, Murray River. How do you connect the CBD with the river? How do you fix that? You have a railway line, you can't cross. And we came up with a water park that shows everybody, school children, how water is collected and purified without using chemicals, without pumping, just using the topography, the water park with different water pots. So school children can go there and see and learn about the process, and also some housing here and so on. We then won this too. And then I worked a lot in Newcastle City Council, on how to fix the problem with an old railway line that's cutting off the city and Hunter Street from the harbour. And there was a lot of development at the harbour front, and this was looking quite good, but here the shops were going broke and closing. And so now this is getting implemented at the moment. Finally, the last 2 kilometers of that railway line are cut back. And they're putting a light railway that goes down and loops around Nobbies up and comes back. And the new railway station is getting built. This is getting implemented, but it took 6, 7 years from when we designed it. Sometimes those projects take a long time, and they require political change and all kinds of things. So how can research help solving those problems cities have? A lot of things we've been working on were about the climate, urban microclimate, cities getting hotter. How do we keep cities cool? You will know that we have regular heat waves now, and Australia's climate is getting hotter all the time. It's a big concern. So how do you mitigate urban heat island? We had 5 PhDs on that in my center in Adelaide, and we were looking at different curves, day and nighttime, the nighttime cooling. The problem is really harnessing and creating headroom for future higher temperatures, because the CBD is always hotter. And sometimes this can be significant. Sometimes this can be 6 or 8 degrees more in the CBD than at the edge of the city. And how do you deal with that? And we did a lot of work. We compared, this is the biggest research project comparing 3 cities, Sydney, Adelaide, and Melbourne, in urban microclimate, and postdoc was involved also. And we did a lot of studies on that. And of course, 2013 and 14 were again the hottest years on record. We're going to see more and more urban heat. And cities become like baking ovens. They don't cool down at night anymore. If you have a heat wave, let's say 1 week over 40 degrees, usually what happens, you open the window overnight, and in the morning you come to your office or to your house, it's fresh and cool. But if you have a baking oven like that, because it stores the heat is stored in the concrete and in the materials, the buildings, and in the asphalt, it doesn't cool down anymore. You have a real issue. And of course, then people turn on more the aircon, which is again blowing more hot air into the public space. So it's kind of a vicious circle. Very interesting how to make sure cities stay cool. We did work with Seoul. We looked at a different land cover type using GIS. Then we were commissioned by 3 cities in China to do a comparative study. We showed them the Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide work. And I hope to do something like this with the next generation city lab for Perth. And then, and Chongqing. We were asked by Shenzhen, Shenyang, and Tianjin to look at their, it's a big research project that came out of that in the last 3-4 years. We went there with equipment and photographed a lot. We found that every degree Celsius we can keep the city cooler means at least 5% energy saving. Now that's interesting. If you have a city like Shanghai with 18 million people, and you manage a huge city, and you manage to save 5% energy, we talk about a gigantic amount of energy. You know? So it's very, very interesting what you do by passive mitigating. And I can't talk about everything now, but mitigation opportunities are basically about vegetation, green roofs, green walls, streets, street trees, very important, and urban forests, very, very good. Melbourne is doing this now. Just parks with lawns don't do much. You need to have tree cover, and what kind of trees doing more and all this. I know Wunli's work is a lot in this area too. Water bodies, very good, to keep it cool, to use evaporative cooling, but also the build form. How do you shade? How do you cross-ventilate? How do you have the right, appropriate quality density? Not too much dense, but not too little dense. So that's the trick. And then what kind of materials do you keep to use the albedo effect? You use reflective surfaces, avoiding heat storage. Those things are very, very important. And we worked interdisciplinary, very large team with very interesting people that taught us a lot, experts on surface material and energy and so on. And urbanization is, of course, at the metro and macro scale. How do you deal with urban precinct scale? So I'm not so much interested anymore at the building level these days. It's all about the precinct neighborhood level, the whole district. It's much more exciting for me. We developed an energy, transport, waste, and water demand forecasting tool. We had a big research project on that with PhDs on that, and we're looking at the transformation of Chinese cities. And what is it? How do you actually make sure China's urbanization is less harmful? And again, the compact mixed-use walkable city with integrated transport planning here, of course, Barcelona, is a very, very good model. For some time, Chinese politicians thought we don't have enough space, we just need to live all in high-rise towers. Now they're moving away from that. They realize that it doesn't need to be the 25, 30-story tower. They're more comfortable with 8, 10, 12-story buildings. And that's a good density to have. It goes back to 750-year-old models, like here in Yemen, Shibam, World Heritage, all built in mud. They call it the clay Manhattan, the Manhattan built of mud. It's amazing. They invented basically the high-rise tower, 12-story and 10-story buildings already with very narrow lanes, so they're always shaded. It's in the middle of a desert, and it's a quite interesting concept because you have around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius cooler spaces in here
than outside here. So we believe it's not about building 25-story towers, and it's not about building suburbs and giving everybody a freestanding house, because the land consumption is too excessive. We lose too much land, and we can't afford this, and we don't want that. So somewhere the urban block up to 8 or 10 stories is probably the future, and you can mix those blocks differently and so on. This is quite interesting, composite blocks, because the tower is not an ideal model, you will know. The tower is actually quite problematic. If you have, for instance, a glass tower like they have in Dubai, and the sun comes out, the solar gain is excessive, and you have to cool this down by mechanical cooling, by air condition. It's not a clever way, because the tower has the maximum facade surface. At the same time, the shed is a terrible model. It's got a huge footprint. It wastes a lot of land, which is precious. So the shed is not a good model. The tower is not a good model. So compactness somewhere between there and optimizing the block and come back to invent new block models like they've done recently, quite successful in Singapore, I think, is quite interesting to start as a best ratio of volume surface, compact yet comfortable. And then you have 7, 8 stories where you mix retail, where you have public space for walking, cycling, public transport, where you have cross-ventilated living with balconies, naturally cooled, and where you have very good working spaces with a lot of daylight from both sides. And this is a good model where we then have maybe some electric vehicles underground. This is a model in a section that works quite well. Not to ignore 1,000 years of history of urbanization. It's very important. The compact, walkable city that shares at times when we started to build cities. Why did we build cities? To share, to be safe, to have a wall around. Together we are stronger, but also to share resources. People said, we like to hang out together, and we can share resources. I've got a bicycle, you've got a drilling machine. Let's move together. I don't have to buy a bicycle and a drilling machine, we share. Sharing is a very interesting idea. Collaborative consumption. It's a fantastic model of the future. Not buying everything individual, overconsumption, and never use it. You know the drilling machine, in average, how much a drilling machine is used in every household?
20 minutes a year.
No, it's 7 minutes. Most of the time twice. So everybody is billing, in Australia, everybody is buying drilling machines to use it twice for 7 minutes. It's ridiculous. I know you use it all the time, drilling holes. But some people have drilling machines they never use, you know, like me. So, yeah. No, I have your bike and you get my drilling machine. What I'm saying is we share. You've got something, I've got something. We treat and we move together. Maybe not. But we live together and we do together better than being alone because it's more fun, and that's why we build cities. Okay? When you go back, when you think, why do people like to hang out in public space? So that tells you already what kind of public space we need. So, you know, we need housing diversity. We need opportunities. We need to, you know, the suburb is a problem. It increases consumption of fuel, for instance, and 85% of all trips of the suburb are by car in Australia, typical, sometimes 90%. You can't run a bus here because you don't have the population density. It's not worth to run a bus. The city will not run a bus down this road. You have to have a car, you know, and you can't bike because you're too far away. And there's public transport is somewhere. There's a railway station, but it's also too far. So you have to at least drive to the railway station. But even worse, you want to buy bread and milk. What do? You drive. And that's the problem. And so we need mixed-use, compact, walkable cities. My biggest message today to you. We need a growth boundary. Like in the 72 plan, Portland, Oregon, was unusual. The whole US believed in sprawl. Car drivers, El Dorado, endless suburb. Los Angeles, we don't need a subway. You know, now they wish they would have one. But you know, Los Angeles never had a subway. Very different from New York, of course. Los Angeles was just sprawling. Everybody had a freestanding one-story bungalow house with a garden around. We adapted that in the 40s, 50s. Australia adapted that American model. Now we have to have new models. appropriate to our lifestyle. Portland did something different. Portland is the most popular city to move to in the US now. Boston, very popular, San Francisco, and Portland. They all had gross boundaries. And this gross boundary in pink was introduced in 1972 by a very smart mayor. And he was almost killed by the guys that owned that land, and that land, and that land. Because they wanted to sell it for housing. And the mayor said, no, because we've got a gross boundary. It's that pink line, and it's not a rubber line. It stays where it is. And he was re-elected and re-elected and re-elected. I forgot his name now. What's his name? Portland guy. Anyway, great mayor. And we had other great leaders, in fact, he was an architect and an urban planner. He became a mayor. Similar story in Curitiba with Jaime Lerner in Brazil and many other places where we see great leadership. Architects become politicians, become mayors, become re-elected 5 times because they're doing a great job. Because architects can do all kinds of stuff. We believe in planners, So it's very interesting. So the gross boundary, this is not what we want. This is a typical result of cheap fossil fuel. Urban heat island, you can only get there by car. You can't open the window of the glass box. It's terrible. It's an outdated model. It's a business park somewhere outside a city. This is, of course, not a city. This is, it's a terrible situation that we don't do anymore. And this is what we've been doing until, let's say, 10 years ago, So we learned, we have international best practice of density and things that worked well on brown fields. What are brown fields? Yeah, green field, gray fields, and brown fields. Brown fields are sites that used to be used for industry, military, this kind of different use, and then military moves away, or industry closes down, or docklands don't build ships anymore. And, Melbourne docklands, London docklands, these are all brown fields. Very interesting to build on brown fields and keep the old buildings for adaptive reuse. Very sustainable. What's the most sustainable building you can ever have? It's the building that didn't get built. What's the second most sustainable building you can ever have? It's the building that already exists. It's an old factory warehouse that you turn into lofts or something, or a university building. It's a building that's already existing. You don't demolish, you keep the structure because of its embodied energy. Might have heritage character too, but it's authentic, it's great, it's been there, it's done well for us for 100 years. Why would you knock it down? The most sustainable is adaptive reuse, the building that's already there. If you start demolishing, you lose. You're already minus 200. To make this up with a very green building, I've been judging the Green Star Awards, and everybody fell in love with this green high-tech box outside the city. And they loved it because it had all kind of functions and gimmicks. It opened at night, it did this, it had solar panels and so on. And they said, oh, this is the winner, this is the winner. And I said, well, hang on. If this building would be in the city, it would be great. It would be the winner. But to get there, there's no public transport. 400 people every day need to drive with their car to get to their workplace, to get to this building. It cannot be a winner. It can't get the award because it's built at the wrong place. We have to do the right thing, okay? Very interesting. So we can build districts that generate more energy than they need. They're surplus energy. They turn citizens into eco-citizens. We can integrate photovoltaic in beautiful buildings, building integrated PV, turning buildings and cities into power stations. Energy plus. Turn people from consumers into citizens, active eco-citizens, producing their own energy. Selling it back into the grid, if you have a smart grid, easy to do. So we have to turn the city into a power station, the city district into a water supply catchment like the water pots we do in Mildura, the city district as a food supply source, where you have tomatoes and carrots growing between the buildings and even on the roofs and maybe even on green walls. That's fantastic. And also empower community. This is what we need to do the city. And there are a lot of good examples. Barcelona, the whole area is powered from this gigantic solar canopy that looks beautiful when you come in to the harbor. We need high-performing public space. In the old days, public space was just about meeting people. Today, it's about meeting people and generating energy and growing food and cleaning, catching water, and so on, and loading your iPad. And this is in Belgium, the entry into the station, which is just cut off here, a long solar canopy on top of the railway that powers the entire railway station. Very good. This is in London, where they're designing bicycle highways, Foster and others coming up with land above the railway line that's owned by the public. You can build above the air rights, and you put a bicycle highway, and suddenly people in London can bike again. Because in London it's very dangerous to bike. You know, people don't respect you, probably like purse, and you don't wear a helmet most of the time in London. So it's interesting. This is a photo I took in Norway, where there is free parking when you have an electric vehicle, and you can load it everywhere for free. In Oslo, how fantastic is this? No registration. Are you from Oslo? No? You look Norwegian. Yes? Half? Do you have electric vehicle? No. Not yet. But you have been, you know this place. I mean, this is fantastic. I'm so impressed. You get free parking. There is a lot of parking. It says electric vehicles only. If you come along with your Holden or whatever, you can't park there. You have to have an electric vehicle, okay? And you can, while you're at work, at uni, you come back, it's charged for free. This is great, and you pay no registration. This is what we call an incentive to make a difference. Because we talk about electric vehicles for years, and it's not happening. And we're going to have to change legislation and make people doing it. This is in my hometown in Stuttgart, South Germany, where people put their bike on the tram, and then they sit in there and go where they want. And then, because the tram doesn't quite bring you where you want to be, you get your bike, and you drive the last kilometer on your bike. The tram and the bike. It's about modes of transport combined, where you change. This is the future. This is fantastic. An interesting graph I just put in. Western Australia could raise its game a little bit. It's number 3. South Australia is number 1. Tasmania is doing a lot. This is renewable capacity installed since 2001. New South Wales actually hasn't done so well. Northern Territory. I think we've got so much sun here. We could run the whole place on solar. Now, photovoltaic, the prices have come down. It's got so affordable now that you get a quick payback. In the last 5 years, the prices have tumbled. They cost only a third of what they were 5 years ago. Now we can see large-scale PV, photovoltaic cells, installed. And so it's interesting to think about your projects. How do you have large-scale canopies to turn the city into the power station by using microturbines for urban wind in the city, if you have a lot of wind, but like Hobart, here we don't have so much wind. What about geothermal, John? Geothermal in Perth?
There is some.
There is some?
I think one of the big pools is heated through.
That's fantastic. Geothermal is out there for free. It costs nothing. You just have to drill into the earth. It's constantly hot, you know, hot rock. You can use it for heating and cooling. You can turn heat into, you know, technology. Your fridge at home works like that. It turns heat into cooling. And you can, if you have hot rock, you can heat and you can cool. It's very interesting. Geothermal technology is the future. If you have it, it depends on your geological situation. Some cities have it, some don't. Hydro, of course, Norway again. Norway is laughing. When we talk about decarbonizing our energy supply, and you go to Oslo, to Norway, they don't understand what you talk about. They've got 90% water power. I mean, this is so much, there's so much hydro. You know, it's fantastic. It has no greenhouse gas emissions. And they say, well, you know, what's the problem? We're doing it. And they are now producing aluminium without CO2 emissions, because the problem when you want to produce aluminium, you need a lot of energy, a lot of electricity. And it depends very much how you generate this electricity. If it comes from renewable, large scale, like hydro, like in Norway, they are now suddenly very popular. They can produce aluminium at almost no greenhouse gas emissions. And that's fantastic. That's a real market advantage in a society, in a world that looks at carbon emissions more and more and greenhouse gas emissions. So I think Western Australia, with all its sun, we can do better than Tasmania or South Australia. Because we have so much sun, we could become the Dubai, Saudi Arabia of solar technology here, you know, if we want. And we're going to see it. So there's a lot of best practice, and I'm wrapping up, because I spoke a little bit longer than planned. If we look at different cities, like San Francisco is famous for zero waste concept, Melbourne for urban renewal and green construction, Sydney has done a lot of water management and cogeneration, and Stockholm and Freiburg-Vauban and Nanjing and Hangzhou have the biggest free bike schemes in the world. So there are cities all over the place where we can learn. Copenhagen is all about cycling. 45% of all trips in Copenhagen are done by bicycle. Here, how much percent in Perth? By bike? 0.5. I think 1% now. And the mayor of Sydney recently said she wants to achieve 5% trips by bike in 2 years. She's building now bike lanes everywhere and so on. I think she's got 3% now, and she wants to achieve 5%. I mean, this would be leading in Australia as the most bike-friendly city, Sydney, if they get there. But here we have 1%, and in Copenhagen they have 45%. So we have to get on those bikes and make it more safe and pleasant to bike. Vancouver's done a lot of good things, London, Curitiba, Helsinki, Singapore, and so on. It only works if we open up those silos between engineering, architecture, and planning, work together, and buildings could become part of the solution by making them carbon sinks. I just fly through, looking at waste as resources. You know, the 4 materials that are responsible for 90% of carbon emissions are concrete, steel, aluminium, and glass. That's why we're researching in the next Gen City Lab on timber. Engineered prefabricated timber that is as strong as steel, and it's a sustainably harvested, regrowing resource. Timber. Timber is the future. Because as you see here, in energy, climate change, air pollution, CO2 emissions, timber always wins against concrete. 1 cubic meter of concrete, by the time it's poured, has emitted more than 1 ton carbon. 1 cubic meter, 1 ton. Whereas timber stores carbon. So if we could build cities like a forest or buildings like trees, what does a tree do? It provides energy and food. It uses solar power, photosynthesis. It collects and stores rainwater and cleans it. It absorbs air pollution. It supplies oxygen and creates a microclimate. It produces no waste. This is pretty amazing. You know, if something falls down from the tree, an ant comes along and uses it to build a house or something. Everything is used in nature. You realize there is no waste. Only since you have e-waste and plastic and all those things you throw out and overconsume, overconsumption, this is waste. This is real wasting. You know, we have then to recycle it and so. But a tree, nature doesn't waste. And on top of it, it absorbs CO2. And if we can make buildings and cities that do, let's say, we probably can't do all of it, but if we can do 4 or 5 of those characteristics, we are world leading. Because there's a lot of carbon stored, and it's a rapidly regrowing resource that never runs out. If we always plant, for every tree we cut down, we plant 2 new ones. So we always have more trees, and it's called a sustainably harvested forestry system, such as we have it in Australia. We store carbon. Timber is the only carbon positive. Grass, bamboo, timber, those things are having a carbon storage capacity, whereas aluminium, copper, glass, and so on have, of course, a negative impact. This is why entire buildings are now built in prefabricated, cross-laminated timber panels that are engineered, and they are as strong as steel. They're prefabricated off-site in factories and just in time transported to site to be assembled. And they can come up to 20 meters long. Softwood and hardwood solutions, like this one, Forte, 10 stories in Melbourne, put together, one floor put together in 1 day. Very short, very fast. It reduces construction times by half. It all is high-quality prefab. One person can put it together with a mobile crane. It usually has the ground floor on concrete, and then off you go in timber, because you resolve the problem with water, with termites, and so on, if you have the first podium in concrete, and then you put a 8 or 10-story timber building on top. And this is done in factories in South Germany, in my home town like this. We've got, in fact, 150 high-tech CNC cutting workshops in Germany that are high-tech prefab concentrated on automation for the timber industry, where windows and insulation, everything is pre-installed. This is high-precision stuff, beautiful. It smells great. You go in, it's quiet, and then it's bzz, bzz, cutting a little bit, and ready comes a big panel. It's off-site fabrication, production line, like building a car. It's the future. Sweden is one of the leaders in prefabricated. Austria is doing a lot. Switzerland. Society has embraced it. They don't think it's less good to have a timber house. They love it. It's high-tech. It's great. And this is a building in London under construction using cross-laminated timber. You see the different layers here put together. And then, of course, it can be clad or whatever. But important is that it's coming from a sustainably harvested, certified forestry system. Okay? That's very important. Like in Europe, Sweden has it, but also Australia could do it. That's why I say, remember my words, steel and glass, Paxton's Crystal Palace, Chicago high-rise in the 19th century was characteristic of architecture and city making in the 19th century. In the 20th century, it was all about concrete. Our own building next door is an indicator of this brutalistic area. But now, in the 21st century, it's all about digitally cut, prefabricated, engineered, high-performance timber that is highly efficient, lightweight, less embodied energy, recyclable 100%. Have you ever tried to recycle a concrete building? Very difficult. Yeah? So this is the future. And I just fly through water, a lot of slides, urban farming. It's happening in Cairo now on the roofs. Transport systems, congestion, the productivity damages. Now we are here somewhere, 2015. We have 1 billion vehicles on this planet. 1 billion. The forecast is that by 2050, we have over 3 billion vehicles. More than 3 times in the next 35 years. Mainly India, China, other Asia, buying cars. Now you can imagine what happens to a city like Bangkok or Manila if you have 3 times the cars that are there now, okay? Of course, the best thing is if people come on their bike. All those 60 people come in 60 cars. That's what you see in the morning when you drive to campus here. 1 person per car. 1 person per car. 60 people coming on cars, wasting so much space for car parking, for instance. If they come on bikes, a lot of space freed up, and they stay healthy. If they come in a bus, it's also freed up. So it's very interesting to think about how silly it is to use public space to park a car. 90% of the time the car is not moving. It's there, it's occupying, it's not looking nice, you know. So, and of course, Ho Chi Minh City here, 7 million people that want to buy cars, you know. The problem is, of course, we have to give those people better models that they don't need to buy the car. Otherwise, all those people on scooters will have cars in 10 years. And then what happens? It's already now gridlock. It's totally crazy, you know. So we have to change the way we design the city. It's not about having cars like the Tata, or I'm driving a smart car. It's still, while it needs less fuel, causes traffic jams. So it's not the future. The future is to design the city that you don't need to drive. That's the difference. Because you still create traffic jams even with the most fuel-efficient car. So we need to reduce the car dependency by recompacting the cities. In the 19th, 20th century, we decompacted the cities into sprawl. Now we need to recompact our existing cities. Car sharing, new models of ownership. And why? If you are driving a lot, you worry more, you are in traffic jam, you are angrier. 19% more likely you give the finger. Don't know what they mean. You honk your horn, you yell, you mimic aggressive behavior. And in fact, couples in which one partner commutes for longer than 45 minutes a day are 40% likelier to divorce. So it's not good for your private relationship with your partner. If you drive, it's much better to cycle.
I would like to commute for 1 hour.
Francesco, this is interesting for you, Francesco, because you're new here. Have you been to Sydney already?
No.
Not yet? Okay, this is Sydney. Okay, Sydney's got what, you know, the CBD, Central Business District. Everything was squeezed into Sydney CBD. Now it's full. Even, Barangaroo here, now it's full. So Sydney needs to become from monocentric to polycentric. And it should have 3 or 4 CBDs. And then you interconnect them with fast light railway or efficient public transport. That's the future, because you cannot have a monocentric city with 5-6 million people. It's ridiculous to allow this to happen. It can't grow. It shouldn't grow. Here's a park. We can't build in the park. We can't build in the water. So it's full. Sydney is full. Many people said. Paul Keating said 20 years ago, Sydney is full. So now, we need to transform Sydney. And one of those big projects is, of course, Barangaroo, which, here's a computer rendering, will be zero waste, water positive, carbon neutral by Lend-Lease. Fantastic master plan. 50% of the site is public space, a new parkland, a cut-in, and then buildings here. This is what it will look like with some high-rise towers by Richard Rogers and others, and housing, mixed use, an extension to the CBD. Very interesting project, almost finished. We'll set new benchmarks for sustainability. Coming to an end, we have to walk the talk. It's not good enough just me standing here talking to you. You have to do it. In the greater Curtin project gives us this unique opportunity to show we can do it. The green campus, the greater Curtin education innovation city, connected with light railway to the CBD and to the airport. This is where we have to be involved, and not only be involved, we have to drive it. We have to get living laboratories, demonstration projects with prefabricated timber, with water collection, with light railway, with new infill typologies, with the whole shebang that I've been talking about. Here we can implement it. It needs to happen. And we move. Our own building should become our new building in 2018. The School of Built Environment and the School of Design and Art will move together. And at the moment we are here, and we will move over there probably in a new building. And this will be the new light railway with a stop right here in front. And this is where you come and you go into architecture studies. And this is fantastic, because if we get this done, it really can put us on the map. It's a huge investment, over the next 10 years. And this is a great chance. So there are 2 sites looked at, most likely. We are now here in Bankwest. This is 201, which will get refurbished and extended even. And a new building will come here, a joint combined facility. So we have to make sure it's the best facility that we can get, So just coming to an end, system thinking. I think those links and synergies between the different systems, natural system and human man-made systems, become more important. We have to understand them, and we have to actually transform those systems, and the way we transform them into more sustainable, self-reliant networks of green urbanism. And of course, the important role of public space, low-impact mobility, we spoke about that, a shift in scale, not just look at your individual building, your isolated one-off building. Look at the urban design of neighborhoods, of low-carbon precincts, of the whole district, and how your building contributes to a district, and a group of buildings that you can balance the energy needs between those buildings and the water consumption. Other things that happen are, of course, urbanization will not stop and slow down. It will even accelerate and continue over the next 20 years until we are even more urbanized, up to 80% probably globally. And those participatory processes, how we involve people in decision-making, become very, very important. The citizens that need to be involved, the people that have no power, we have to make sure the city is for them, the older people, the elderly, the sick people, the children. How do we do that? Those new processes need to be better. We see a paradigm shift. For a long time, there was a belief that technology will fix it all. Technology will fix it, don't worry. Today we know it will not. It's all about technology alone will not be enough. It has to be put in a societal framework that makes it work in the right way. Otherwise, technology means nothing. And urban governance, new forms of partnerships, sharing and cooperation between us two. This will be the future. And we publish a lot. We have a book series, Designing for Zero Waste, Motivating Change, Low Carbon Cities. We're working now on wood in the city. We're working on urban microclimates. We're working on density and sustainability. I hope those 3 can be produced now in the next 12 months. Push them out. New books. Yep, that's an authored book. about the role of building prefabricated timber buildings in the urban context, not somewhere in the forest, but in the city, 10-story prefab. The urban microclimates, what do we do to make sure cities don't get hotter and hotter? And if they do so, how do we mitigate? What kind of materials and techniques? And the other one is, of course, the link between density and sustainability. Very confused, very difficult, not well understood. So we need a book on those. So this is what we do. This is what I covered. I want to invite you for some drinks outside. You can always send me an email anytime. But if you have any question now, let's say we allow for 2 questions, and then we can speak outside. Yes?
I'm one person, I've got 2 questions.
You can only have one because somebody else.
For the sustainable green Curtin University, that design you presented looked rather good. But how far along in the design detail is it, and has it been accepted by those in charge?
Yes. There is a master planning process that's been going on for the last years. This master plan has now, it's a flexible framework. It can still, change. Good master plans are not rigid. They stay flexible, okay? Because they need to help us for the next 15 years, 10, 15 years, they need to serve us. So we cannot be locked in some master plan. So the master plan that has been completed now and is there and now is getting developed into different parcels and what to do at the different areas. This master plan has just won an award. It just won also the first 5 Green Star community tool project certification. I don't know if you follow those things, but Green Star is a rating tool, and it has a neighborhood community tool within Green Star. And the first project ever in Australia is our master plan. This is pretty significant. Andy has done a great job, Andy Sharp, with his consultants. He's got a whole army of consultants. Good architects were involved, like Hassel, Donaldson and Warren, where a whole group of architects helped on different aspects. And this master plan has evolved the last 2-3 years. And now it's a master plan, okay? Now we're looking at different areas to zoom in and to look at what can be done on the building level and how it all relates. And so we zoom in, zoom out, and where does the new creative precinct go? Was a lot of discussion. Could there be time for a competition to invite 4 or 5 offices to compete for the best design? I say yes, let's do it. But now not sure if they do it because the time, we are running a little bit late. The building is supposed to be finished 2018 for us to move in. So it's only 2.5 years away. And now we have to see if there is time enough for a competition. Does this answer you want to add something? Yes, in the way that the student works for one of those selected offices that will enter. Yeah, so there will be probably 4 or 5 offices. There are shortlisted. There's been a hot list going around. Everybody had a different list. You can imagine if you have to select 4 or 5 offices to design the new architecture school or School of Built Environment. It's quite interesting. Everybody has a different short list, and so everybody came with a short list, and I don't think there's an agreement yet. And the Vice Chancellor said she wants to have a competition. She's done a competition at UQ when she was Deputy Vice Chancellor there, and she saw the advantage of having a quick and dirty competition, like a month or 2 months maximum, and have a couple of good offices competing to see who comes up with the best proposal. That always makes sure we can be sure we get the best proposal, the best concept to move on, to move forward, because it's a big investment, Maybe if there's one more question.
National or international?
Not sure. I think it's going to be rather national. Yeah, we've got a lot of very good architects here in Australia, Francesco. Sure. Actually, university buildings, it's pretty amazing the last 10 years. I mean, if you follow the publications, what the University of Melbourne just built a new architecture building, and so it's pretty amazing. I must say, what the level of university buildings in the last 10 years. Everybody's trying to be better than the other universities. So there's a little bit of competition between the universities going on. We've got 40 universities in Australia, and all of them have built new buildings on their campuses. All, and some have done amazing stuff, And some have still to build those buildings. And we have been a little bit slow at the beginning, looking what others are doing. And now our time has come. We're going to build a lot of buildings here in the next 10 years. Now we are ready. We have a good master plan. It took some time. But we're going to see a lot of action there in the next years, I think.